And so if Harris wins, it's certain what's going to happen. The certainty is that Trump, especially, he'll take the lead and others will follow along, will say that he won the election and that he's the proper winner, and that the election was stolen, and a lot of people will believe it. And then he will try to incite violence as he did before. That's just obviously what's going to happen.
Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF. I'm honored to have on as our guest former U.S. Senator John Danforth, who served Missouri from 1976 to 1995. He was also the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations from 2004 for another 5-year period of time there. And one of the reasons I wanted the senator on here is he's been very vocal in a couple of areas, and one that's particularly interesting, I think, to our audience. Well, I think both are particularly interesting. One is how to salvage and save the Republican Party and make it healthy again in a post-Trump world. And I'd like to have the senator come back and talk more about how he sees the legacy of the Republican Party, its major tenets that have been violated by the MAGA strain of what's happening in the Republican Party right now, and how for our democracy it needs to be rebuilt. But I want to focus today, while we have you, Senator, is on your views and analysis and commentary around the 2020 election, the attempts to undermine democracy as a whole by Donald Trump and his followers, claiming that it was an illegitimate election that was stolen from him. What did that mean then? What your views are of that? And what does it mean as we're approaching and thinking about the other side of Tuesday? And we already know, and then I'll turn it right over to you, Senator, we already know that unlike the first go around, where all the 60 or so lawsuits were filed after the fact, we already have had in the last 4 years, building to this moment, Republicans and others working for Donald Trump who've already filed lawsuits or have them ready to be filed, in which they want to try to undermine the legitimacy of this election before it's even run. I voted, maybe you did too, but election day is still a few days off and we don't have the results, let alone certification. And yet the makings of a attempt to interfere with the peaceful transfer and undermine our democracy has already started, and we found it in the blueprint of 2020. Senator, thank you for being on our show and addressing our audience.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah. Tell us about your 2020 ideas and what do you think it means for the future and future election interference?
I was one of 8 Republican lawyers who wrote a report. And the title of the report was Lost, Not Stolen. And it was an analysis of the 2020 election and of every count of every lawsuit that was filed after that election. And the group of 8 included retired federal judges, a retired Solicitor General of the United States, the leading Republican expert on election law. We examined every count of every case that was filed, and we did not find evidence of fraud sufficient to overturn the result in a single precinct, much less the election as a whole. The idea that the election in 2020 was stolen is just flat out wrong. There's no chance that it was stolen. The effort to try to steal an election nationally would be so monumental, involving so many people at so many levels who would have to be involved in the scheme, that it's impossible. So there is no chance that the 2020 election was stolen. And yet, Donald Trump and his key supporters spread that word. And because the Republican Party has become so largely involved in Donald Trump himself and the personality of Donald Trump, that charge of stolen election was believed by millions and millions of people, some fraction of whom attacked the Capitol on January 6th with that there are many, many more. And there are many to this day who believe the assertion by Trump that the 2020 election was stolen. And now he's beginning to say the same thing and set the stage for the same sort of charge after this year's election. It's a very, very serious matter, not just because it's false and because it did trigger violence on January 6th, but it's an attack on the Constitution itself. And that's what's unthinkable. It's an attack on the legitimacy of an election, on the legitimacy of a presidency, on the legitimacy of court decisions, on the peaceful transfer of power. It's a very, very serious matter to attack the legitimacy of an election when there is no foundation for making that attack.
And you undermine, as you said, and I saw a recent interview with you, you're undermining one of the basic principles or bedrocks of the Constitution. You're undermining the consent of the governed. Without it, there is no constitutional republic. There is no democracy.
So said Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, that government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed.
Yeah.
So if you undermine public confidence in the republic, you've undermined the consent on which our government and our system depends.
Why do you think, Senator, this populist strain of republicanism has taken hold and overcome, at least for now, the Republican Party? Why are there so many followers and believers of Donald Trump, this brand of populism, which has many, it's virulent and has many disgusting forms that we are too numerous for us to discuss during this particular interview. The hate-filled speeches at the Madison Square Garden event alone would have been a disqualifying event for any other candidate in the past. But for this candidate, it emboldens and activates and triggers his base. How did that happen exactly, in your view?
The basic tactic in politics today on both the right and the left is to appeal to grievance and rage and to try to say to people, well, listen, you've been bullied, you've been picked on. And this does happen from the Trump type people who basically say that they're elites, they're people in universities, corporate leaders, who and the deep state, and these people have it out for you, and it's a big cabal, and they're picking on you, and they're undermining everything you believe in, your cultural positions and everything else. It's also happening from the left with identity politics. It's the sense of they're the oppressors and the oppressed, and you're oppressed and you're being picked on. That's the political style today in America. From the standpoint of Trump supporters, there are people who do feel that they've been run over. They've been passed over. They're not doing well economically. They believe their kids are going to schools and they're being taught things that are antithetical to their fundamental beliefs, and they think they're being bullied. So along comes Donald Trump with his style, which is a bullying style, and therefore they think, well, okay, we're being bullied, he's our bully, and we're all for him, and we're for him no matter what. I think that's what's happened.
Yeah, and it's like that old saying that I heard Bill Clinton repeat a couple of times: it's better to be wrong and strong and then weak and right. And they see a lot of strong, and we see a lot of wrong in our audience with Donald Trump. I agreed with something I either read that you wrote or that I saw that you said, which is somebody like you is a proud Reagan Republican. It's very close to somebody like me who's a Kennedy Clinton Democrat. I'm just this side to the center on left, and you're on that side on right, and we got along, always did, very, very well, and had policy differences for sure. but not hate-filled attacks, right? Not this where the wing nuts have taken over the parties, and you can't have a civil discourse.
Well, there was a lot of overlap too.
Mhm.
I mean, there was back in ancient history when I was in the Senate, there was a lot of overlap between Republicans and Democrats, and that constituted the center. So, there were people around who, people like, say, David Boren and David Pryor and Sam Nunn and all these people. And then there were a lot of Republicans who were centrists as well. So there've been various surveys, and right now it's said that the most liberal Republican is more conservative in the Senate than the most conservative Democrat. There's no overlap. In those days, there was. And there was also a sense of comity and even friendship, personal friendships.
Mhm.
I mean, my relationship with my colleague in the Senate, Tom Eagleton, he was a Democrat and a progressive, and I was a Republican and conservative, but really very warm personal relationship with him. And our families knew each other, we were in each other's homes, that kind of thing. That's lacking right now. So the whole tone in politics now is, the two sides are incompatible. And it's basically a fight between good and evil. And you hear this right now, particularly among Republicans, but also Democrats who say that this election is going to be existential, that this is really a battle to the end. It's Armageddon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it isn't. I mean, the country has survived worse than this, that's for sure. And it will survive this. But it's very important to reconstitute the center.
Yeah. I mean, is there any? I'm just asking hypothetical. You think Ronald Reagan would be the Republican nominee today with this strand of Trump-dominated MAGA?
No, because I think that right now the party has just moved very far from Reagan. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if Reagan thought that the Republican nominee for president was supporting 10% across the board punitive tariffs, or the Republicans would be supporting pulling the plug on Ukraine, or that Republicans would be inciting people to attack the Capitol building and challenging the legitimacy of elections, Ronald Reagan would be turning over in his grave. So, you can be a Reagan Republican or you can be a Trump Republican. You can't really be both. They're incompatible.
And Senator, let's move it forward. We've got an election that's just hours away. We know there's a process. We've all learned it. If we didn't know the process for vote counting and certification at the state level all the way to the United States Senate, we all know it now from 2020, and the role of federal courts apparently in this process, and the Supreme Court has gotten involved with this process. What do you think? What are you seeing? What keeps you up at night about what Donald Trump and the people around him are doing and saying about the outcome of this election?
They've already laid a foundation for challenging it. They've taken the position that the only way that Trump can lose is if the election is stolen. They've already said that. And so if Harris wins, it's certain what's going to happen. The certainty is that Trump, especially, he'll take the lead and others will follow along, will say that he won the election and that he's the proper winner and that the election was stolen, and a lot of people will believe it. And then he will try to incite violence as he did before. That's just obviously what's going to happen. Now we should be forearmed. We know it. We know it's going to happen. It's clear what's going to happen. So it's very important not to wait around for months as we did with our report back for the 2020 election, but immediately counter the assertion that the election was stolen. And I just wanted to say very clearly that in America today, because of the size of the country, the complexity of the country, the number of precincts, the number of election workers, election watchers, monitors on both sides, secretaries of state, courts, and so on, there is no possibility that this election is going to be stolen. Absolutely no possibility at all. So we've got to be ready instantly to counter the assertion to the contrary.
I hope we are ready. I mean, I had a chill go down my spine for our audience when you said it's obvious that Donald Trump's going to incite violence again against the democracy and against the American people. I mean, every time I do a video analysis, I have to remind everybody that everyone he talks about, Donald Trump and his rhetoric, everybody that's the enemy within or the enemy outside, it's all fellow Americans that he is talking about. I mean, let's put aside that he thinks that we're a garbage receptacle and then jokes about it. That's how the person who wants to return to the White House feels about Americans and America. But the fact that you think, and I agree with you, that he will, they'll pick up pitchforks and torches again. And we got to be ready. Do you think we're ready? Do you think the institutions and the guardrails around our democracy that were so challenged during 2020, have they been strengthened? Are the right people heading it? Are we ready to do what Senator Danforth, what you just called for?
Well, I think as a matter of systems, the answer is yes. But here you have somebody who is everything he says and everything he does is accepted or believed by tens of millions of people. And so when tens of millions of people, let's say that it's less than that, let's say 3 million people believe that the system doesn't work and that the election was stolen and all this is a fraud and that they're willing to overthrow this, that's very serious to the health of a country. It's very, very serious. So, yeah, I think it's not just the system, it's the beliefs. And so I think that it's really important to counter it as best we can. And we won't be able to counter it entirely because of the personality cult of Donald Trump. But as best we can to counter any kind of statement that the election was stolen.
Yeah, I think it's going to be up to, you were an attorney general for a long time in Missouri. I think it's going to be up to the attorney generals around the country to reassure people in a way that they did after the fact with the prosecutions. It's going to be up to the federal courts to step up and step in here and help protect democracy once again. I've told our audience, expect even up to the United States Supreme Court to get involved again, unfortunately, with this particular upcoming presidential election. I was always hoping that 2000 would be the last time we'd ever have a Supreme Court involved with determining who was the president of the United States. But I think that it's going to happen again. It's already started to happen. Senator Danforth, I can't express enough to you our pride at having you on here and talking to our audience directly. We get some Republicans on here. I've interviewed Michael Luttig about 4 different times. I'm sure you've run into Michael at various, Judge Luttig at various events and things that you serve on together. And he's come out, as you know, very strongly, not just because he helped Mike Pence make the right decision to save democracy and certify that election, but has come out with a group of other people like him to support Kamala Harris, because he believes right now strongly, and he's never voted for a Democrat before his entire life. But he told us in an interview that he just can't trust his current party with any aspect of power. And so he thinks the only party that can be trusted with the rule of law protection right now in our Constitution is the Democrats. And I'd like to have you back one day and talk about what you're trying to do to restore. We only have 2 parties in this country. I think we're 1 party short right now. I like to have that restored. I sleep better at night knowing there's a healthy Republican Party as a Democrat, to be fair.
our day will come again. So fear not.
Thank you. Senator John Danforth joining Legal AF on this special interview, and I hope to have you back on the other side of Tuesday. Good luck, Senator, you and your family, and to the great state of Missouri.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.